In the summer of 1947, a single press release out of a small town in New Mexico set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. For one day, just one day, the United States military told the world it had recovered a flying disc. By the next morning, that statement was gone, replaced by a far more ordinary explanation. The record was corrected, the headlines moved on, and the story faded. For 30 years, almost no one spoke of it. And then it came back, bigger, stranger, and more persistent than ever. This is the documented history of the Roswell incident. What was reported, what was actually found, what the government itself later admitted, and why, nearly 80 years later, the questions still have not gone quiet. Before we begin, one important note. This video is informative and documentary in nature. Our goal is not to claim that the Roswell incident proves the existence of extraterrestrial life, nor to declare that it was nothing at all. Instead, we are going to follow the evidence as it actually unfolded. The official statements, the declassified reports, the testimony of the people involved, and the explanations offered over the decades. Some of what you will hear is firmly documented. Some of it is disputed. We will be clear about which is which. Because the real story of Roswell is not just about what may have fallen from the sky. It is about how a single event can grow, change, and take on a life of its own. To understand Roswell, you have to understand the summer it happened in. In 1947, the United States was 2 years out of the Second World War and stepping into a new and uneasy era, the early Cold War. The atomic bomb had been developed in New Mexico, and the region remained dense with military installations and classified research. Roswell Army Airfield was home to the 509th Bomb Group, at the time the only military unit in the world equipped to deliver nuclear weapons. That same summer, something else was sweeping the country, a wave of so-called flying saucer sightings. Just weeks earlier, on June 24, 1947, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 shining objects flying near Mount Rainier in Washington state. He described their motion like a saucer skipping across water, and the press coined the phrase flying saucer. Within days, reports of strange objects in the sky were pouring in from across the United States. The public was primed. The phrase was everywhere. And then, into that atmosphere, came a report from a ranch outside Roswell. Sometime in late June or early July of 1947, a rancher named William Brazel, known to almost everyone as Mac, found a large field of strange debris scattered across the property he managed near Corona, New Mexico, roughly 75 miles from the town of Roswell. According to later accounts, the material included rubber strips, tinfoil, a tough kind of paper, lightweight beams or sticks, and tape with unusual markings. Brazel reportedly first noticed the wreckage but did not think much of it right away. On July 6, 1947, Brazel brought some of the material into Roswell and showed it to the county sheriff, George Wilcox. The sheriff, in turn, contacted the nearby Army airfield. The base sent its intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel, along with a counterintelligence agent, Captain Sheridan Cavett, to investigate. The 2 men accompanied Brazel back out to the ranch and collected wreckage from the debris field, returning with it to the base. What happened next is what turned a local curiosity into an international headline. On July 8, 1947, the public information officer at Roswell Army Airfield, Lieutenant Walter Haut, issued a press release on the orders of the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard. The statement was extraordinary. It announced that the field had come into possession of a flying disc recovered from a ranch in the Roswell region. The local newspaper, the Roswell Daily Record, ran it on the front page with a headline that would echo for decades: RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. The story moved instantly across the news wires and was picked up around the world. For a few hours, the official position of a United States military base was that it had recovered a flying disc. And then, almost as quickly, the story reversed. Higher up the chain of command, at the 8th Air Force Headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, Brigadier General Roger Ramey stepped in. Ramey told the press that there had been a mistake, that what had actually been recovered was not a disc at all, but the remains of a weather balloon and its radar reflector. Photographs were taken of Major Marcel kneeling beside torn foil and broken sticks, presented as the ordinary wreckage behind the sensational headline. By July 9th, the correction had gone out, the newspapers printed the new explanation, and the matter was officially closed. For roughly 3 decades, the Roswell story essentially disappeared. It was treated as a brief, slightly embarrassing mix-up from the early saucer craze, a military base that got ahead of itself, quickly corrected by its own superiors. It rarely appeared in books. It was not a fixture of UFO culture. If you had asked most Americans in the 1960s about Roswell, you would likely have gotten a blank stare. That silence is an important part of the story, because it means everything that came later, the alien bodies, the second crash site, the elaborate cover-up, did not exist in the public record in 1947. It emerged much later, built on the memories and retellings of people interviewed years and even decades after the event. To understand how the legend grew, we have to jump forward to the late 1970s. In 1978, a nuclear physicist and UFO researcher named Stanton Friedman interviewed a retired lieutenant colonel, the same Jesse Marcel who, as a young major, had collected debris from the ranch in 1947. Marcel, by then long out of the service, told Friedman that he had always believed the material he handled was not from this earth. He described debris with unusual properties. Thin metallic foil that, he said, returned to its original shape when crumpled, and lightweight beams marked with strange symbols. Marcel's account reignited interest, and in 1980, authors Charles Berlitz and William Moore published a book titled The Roswell Incident. The book put Marcel's testimony at its center and went much further, suggesting that an extraterrestrial craft had crashed, that the government had recovered it, and that the weather balloon story had been a deliberate cover-up. It was this book, more than the events of 1947 themselves, that launched Roswell into the cultural phenomenon we know today. Through the 1980s and into the 1990s, the story kept expanding. New witnesses came forward, often many years after the fact. Accounts appeared describing not just unusual debris, but the recovery of bodies, non-human beings, allegedly retrieved from a crash site and taken away under secrecy. One frequently repeated claim, attributed to a Roswell mortician named Glenn Dennis, described conversations about small caskets and an unsettling encounter at the base hospital. Other accounts placed a second crash site miles from the original debris field. Each new telling added detail, and each detail was repeated until it felt like established fact. By the mid-1990s, Roswell had become one of the most famous stories in the world. In 1995, a British producer named Ray Santilli released black and white footage that he claimed showed an autopsy of an alien recovered from Roswell. The alien autopsy film was broadcast internationally and watched by millions. Years later, Santilli acknowledged that the footage was not authentic original film, but a staged reconstruction, which he described as a recreation of footage he claimed to have seen. The episode is a useful reminder of how much of the Roswell legend was driven not by 1947 evidence, but by material produced decades later. As public interest surged, so did pressure on the government to explain what had really happened. In 1994, partly at the request of New Mexico Congressman Stephen Schiff, the U.S. Air Force conducted an internal review and released its findings. Its conclusion: the debris recovered in 1947 was most consistent with a balloon train from a then classified program called Project Mogul. Project Mogul was a top-secret effort to detect Soviet nuclear tests from high altitude using long strings of balloons carrying microphones and radar reflectors. Crucially, the Air Force pointed to a specific launch, Mogul Flight Number 4, sent up from Alamogordo Army Airfield in early June 1947, whose tracking was lost as it drifted in the direction of the Brazel Ranch. The materials in a Mogul train, foil, rubber, wooden beams, and reinforced tape with markings, matched the descriptions of the Roswell debris closely. In this account, the original weather balloon statement in 1947 was not the whole truth, but not because of aliens. It was because the real purpose of the balloons was itself classified. The weather balloon, the Air Force said, was a convenient cover for a secret surveillance program. In 1995, the U.S. Government Accountability Office completed a separate search for records related to the incident. It found that some relevant administrative records from the Roswell base, covering this period, had been destroyed years earlier, a fact that fueled suspicion among those who believed in a cover-up, though the report did not conclude that anything extraterrestrial had been hidden. That still left the most dramatic claim of all, the bodies. In 1997, the Air Force released a second report, titled the Roswell Report, Case Closed. It attempted to address the accounts of small, non-human figures recovered in the desert. The report's explanation was that witnesses may have combined separate events, seen years apart, into a single memory. In the 1950s, the military had conducted high-altitude parachute tests across New Mexico using anthropomorphic dummies, human-shaped test figures dropped from balloons and aircraft as part of programs like Operation High Dive. These dummies, the report argued, could account for descriptions of small, oddly proportioned bodies being collected from the desert and loaded into vehicles. The report also pointed to a 1956 aircraft accident and an injured airman as possible sources of other recollections. Its central idea was that, over decades of retelling, people had merged the 1947 debris, the 1950s dummy drops, and other incidents into one extraordinary story. Critics were quick to note the obvious tension in this explanation. The dummy tests happened years after 1947, so they could not literally have been at the original scene. The Air Force's answer was that human memory, especially across long spans of time and after repeated retelling, is far less reliable than we like to believe, and that witnesses had, in good faith, blended distinct events together. So why, given all of this, does Roswell remain so powerful? Part of the answer is timing. It happened at the very birth of the flying saucer era, in a place defined by secrecy and nuclear weapons, involving a real military base that really did, however briefly, announce the recovery of a flying disc. That single, documented fact, the original press release, gives the story a foundation that pure rumor never has. Part of the answer is the secrecy itself. Project Mogul was genuinely classified. Records were genuinely destroyed. The first official explanation was genuinely incomplete. When people later learned that the government had not told the full truth in 1947, even for ordinary national security reasons, it became easy to wonder what else might have been left out. And part of the answer is simply human. Roswell is a story about the gap between what authorities say and what people suspect, about how memory shifts over decades, about how a community, a town, and eventually an entire culture can build something lasting out of a few strange days in the desert. Today, Roswell hosts museums, festivals, and a thriving identity built around the incident, a town forever shaped by what may or may not have fallen from its skies. Here is what we can say with confidence. In July 1947, real debris was found on a ranch near Roswell. A real military base really did announce the recovery of a flying disc, then retracted it within a day. Decades later, the government acknowledged that the debris was most likely from the classified Project Mogul, and that the original explanations had concealed that program. The accounts of recovered bodies emerged largely from testimony gathered many years after the fact, and were officially explained as the conflation of separate events. What remains is the part no report can fully settle: belief. For some, Roswell is a solved case dressed up in mystery. For others, the very existence of secrecy and destroyed records leaves room for doubt that will never quite close. Perhaps that is the real legacy of Roswell, not a definitive answer, but a permanent question, kept alive by the distance between the official record and the human need to know. If you found this documentary worth your time, consider subscribing for more documented cases from the Unexplained archives. We examine the evidence, separate what is known from what is claimed, and let you decide what to believe.